Some colonization is bad and some is worse, but I'm going to explain the different types of colonization that Africa saw and recommend these three books that I think give you an insight into the history of Africa itself. But not all colonization was the same. Like, I think when people think of colonization, they think of it from the perspective of what happened here in America, which was settlers coming and living here. And that happened in Africa. There were settler colonies in South Africa. The British colonies were often settler colonies. Kenya, South Africa, Zimbabwe and Zambia, that was formerly known as Rhodesia, those were settler colonies. That means people moving there, establishing long-running societies. The Dutch were in South Africa as far back as the 1600s, became British in the 1800s. Those people stayed. They wanted to build societies and move people there. But that wasn't the only type of colonization in Africa, nor was it the most common. There was also extractive, exploitative. All colonization is exploitative, but I'm saying like some colonies were designed to just be like removing those resources, and we call those exploitative colonies. Like the form of colonization is called exploitative colonization or extractive colonization. The most egregious example would be the Belgians and the Congo, where they ravaged the Congo. I did a whole video about the Congo. You can go watch that. Or a lot of the French colonies were also that type of colonization. There were also some colonies that were like plantation based in Africa. That was much less common. Sao Tome and Principe, Equatorial Guinea. Sao Tome and Principe was Portuguese. Equatorial Guinea was Spain, but those were plantation colonies. They would use forced labor of the populations there, and they would mainly farm for cacao. That's what they farmed there. And then there were also colonies like extending back from before the era where Africa really got colonized. 1800s onward is when Africa would be largely colonized after the scramble of Africa began taking root. That's when all the Europeans decided they wanted to like get a piece of the African continent at the expense of the native Africans living there. But even before that, there were some coastal trading port colonies. And what would they trade? Well, they would trade gold, they would trade cacao, they would trade people, slaves. So those were like coastal port colonies, and those existed as far back as the 1500s. They would mainly just be a port city or something that would do business with the empires and governments in Africa that existed at the time. Africa wasn't some like Wild West. There were empires and governments. But the reason the British or these European powers couldn't go inland was because they would die. The diseases were too great. And until quinine, which was the malaria prophylactic treatment, got developed, that's what it kind of allowed white people to go into Africa. Again, I've said this before, but like in America, like the Americas, the indigenous population were ravaged by European diseases. The same was not true in Africa, which was used to the diseases of Europe, but white people weren't used to the diseases of Africa. And if you want to know more about Africa, I would suggest Why Nations Fail. It looks at the city of Nogales, which is actually like on the border of Mexico and the United States, but it has two totally different outcomes. Like the side on the United States is successful. The side on the side of the city that's on the side of Mexico is not, even though they have the same demographics, they're in the same place, they have the same resources. Why does that happen? This is a famous book that analyzes it. I've suggested this book before, but Martin Meredith's State of Africa goes from pre-colonization to present. It's an incredibly detailed book, and it's a riveting read. And a new edition is An African History of Africa. This is really important, I think, because this is written by a European man, and this is written by someone who's from Africa. And even though I think this is a great book, I think you need this perspective. And Africa is a lot more than colonization. That's an important piece of the history to explain why the state of affairs is what it's now. But Africa is also the cradle of humanity. It was the site of one of the wealthiest empires in the world, the wealthiest man in the world. It was the site of trading. It's the earliest place of Christianity in the world. Important to read this as well, to understand the great continent that is Africa, which comprises 20% of the world's landmass.